Mexico's most powerful drug kingpin was killed during a military operation.
Iran's supreme leader, the 86-year-old Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, is dead.
Explosions erupting across Puerto Vallarta tonight. Black smoke seen rising over the resort city on Mexico's Pacific coast.
He was the target of joint American-Israeli airstrikes that have just pummeled at Iran over the last 24 hours. In theory, Iran should have an assembly of clerics come together to pick a new supreme leader. However, that has not been announced yet, and it remains unclear whether Iran would be able to do that given the fact that it remains under this American and Israeli airstrike campaign.
Mexican authorities say the United States provided complimentary information for their operation. A U.S. defense official telling ABC News Northcom provided information for the raid.
This also calls into question the calls by U.S. President Donald Trump for the Iranian people to rise up and take back their government.
The State Department is warning Americans to shelter in place.
Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-hosts, teacher and socialist Andy Libson and socialist Kenny Cepeda. We're online at whatsleftpodcast.com. You can find that link to our site in the episode notes. You can also find my personal social media handle as at Don Eduardo Barca. Please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications, and share your favorite episode wherever you found this episode. We have merch as well. If you fancy a shirt, you can contact us to our site at whatsleftpodcast.com. You can also check out our Spanish version of What's Left. I'm editing a video that's taking a bit, but I'm still on there and alive at Que Queda de la Izquierda, and hopefully Kenny can join us this week. So thank you very much for sharing that as well, the Spanish version of What's Left. All right, Andy, we're back on this topic. It seems every weekend, as we were saying, there is something new, or it seems every month. January, Venezuela; February, Mexico; and March. Well, today's still February, but it seems by the time it'll be...
No, it's March 1st. It's March.
Yeah. Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Oh, so look, well, it was yesterday, I meant to say, Iran.
Yeah.
So Iran has become the topic, and I think it's worth mentioning since we did do an episode about it and we were predicting what would happen. And you called me yesterday and you saw the significance and importance to it, to how it's related to also what happened last weekend. Why don't you tell us what you think of Iran first, why you thought we should connect it?
Well, first, we were going to talk and are going to talk about what has been going down in Mexico, the war on drugs there, and the collaboration of the U.S. ruling class with the Mexican ruling class in essentially using state terror, state authoritarianism to kill leaders they want. You know, think about it. Kill leaders you want in order to make the world the way you want to make the world. And that's what's going on in Mexico, and we're going to get back to that. And I think actually my students were actually talking about this week what's going on in Mexico. Is Mexico safe and things like that? Like, I've never heard that kind of discussion with middle schoolers talking about. They didn't even talk. Epstein is what they talk about, and Mexico. That's been almost the only political stuff I've ever heard middle schoolers say this year. Maybe the ICE stuff. Yes, the ICE stuff was coming up, but virtually everything else is off the radar. And so with you being in Mexico and to be able to give us a real on the ground kind of sense of what is happening, that is what we're going to talk about today. But just last night, the U.S. and Israel started their attack on Iran, and looks like did a success. And the attack, although the bringing of naval forces there and air forces there and refueling things are all set to basically have a full-scale missile and air assault. That is not what has started. This opening salvo was strictly missile and was fairly reserved in terms of the number of targets. It was not a shock and awe that you saw in Iraq, but it was a very successful decapitation strike. For reasons that I cannot understand, the leadership of Iran assembled themselves in the compound of Khamenei's thing, apparently to have an above ground meeting. Now, I don't know why. I don't know why they would do that, but they did it and they got hit and a bunch of them got killed. And that's a victory for the United States, a big one. Israel is joining in. So the last war was the Israel attacking with U.S. joining late. This is now a joint U.S.-Israel war in the Middle East, which is also a historic in a sense because of what it means for the future collaboration of these obviously two powers that are working together in the region. In addition to the decapitation strike, there was one of the more notorious or infamous strikes was a school where a bunch of all girls school where a bunch of school kids were just killed, slaughtered. So, a little taste of what Israel has done to Gaza came to Iran yesterday, basically, and there's going to be more. Iran responded with a series of attacks to various U.S. bases and into Israel itself, and apparently was giving just initial strikes with their low tech stuff, and did hit stuff. So, and today was the first day in which there were casualties reported on the part of the United States. But the war has started, and maybe since I give a long overview, I'll just say this. I'll say two things, and people can add to theirs. Number one, there have been many people who are critical of the Ukraine war, critical of the Iran war. You see them on YouTube. We're not talking about Brian Berletic, but we're talking about others who are like, U.S. is not going to do this. Like, there's no way. Like, this is stupid. This is crazy. It's like, and why are they letting Israel run their show? And it's like, this is not Israel running the show, and this is not crazy. This is the U.S. Like, the U.S. is not. The U.S. is not. It doesn't even have to do a regime change in Iran. It just has to wreck Iran, because Iran is China's Israel in the region. That China is trying to establish Iran as its control center in that region. And so the U.S. it makes sense that they're doing. One, you can't bring all this war stuff to a place and then just pull it out without destroying something. If you do, as an empire, you look weak. But two, this isn't crazy. This makes a lot of sense, actually. This is if you want to call it, I'm going to say it, this is the right move for the U.S. empire. And it actually had a good day yesterday. Or what will be last week. It had a good day when it was able to decapitate much of the leadership, or an important section of leadership, because it basically establishes that the U.S. is able to do what it wants to do to any ruling class it wants to in the region. And I think that's very meaningful, because the venality and criminality of the U.S. ruling class is not that can be encapsulated by the spirit of Epstein Island. There is Epstein Island in every ruling class across the globe. The Iranian ruling class are Epstein Island. The Chinese ruling class are Epstein Island. The Russian ruling class are Epstein Island. They're all fucking criminals. They're all cowards. So the U.S. knows that if you decapitate these people, that everyone else who are cowardly, venal criminals, they're going to scatter like roaches as well. And so the U.S. knows that, like, if you threaten Lindsey Graham, he's running away. That's what's going to happen. He's not going to stand and fight. This is not what these people are made of. But they know that's true of the other ruling classes. So the reason I'm getting upset about this is, one, people thought that the U.S. wasn't going to do this. Of course they were going to do it. Two, people think this is about Israel controlling the United States. No, it isn't. The U.S. this is a giant blow against China by the United States. And China's not going to be able to do any fuck all about it. We'll have to see now what comes up next. And the last thing is, and this is in talking to some of my revolutionary comrades and even my brother who were thinking like, man, if Israel, if Iran can just strike and like hurt the United States, I get it. Like, split an aircraft carrier in two with a shot. I can understand people wanting to see that. The fact is, none of this is going to change unless there's a revolution in our country. This is not something that's going to be fought between these cowardly, venal, criminal ruling classes willing to destroy each other and destroy us over their little squabbles. This is going to have to be solved by the working class. And if it's not, you can sink as many aircraft carriers as you want. But unless US workers stop connecting themselves to Republican Party, Democratic Party, whatever party, and start saying we have to defend ourselves and stand up for ourselves, not in fake UESF strikes, but real strikes that we control as workers, then I don't care how many aircraft carriers go to the bottom of the sea. This is going to end in nuclear war. And last, diplomacy is over. There is no diplomacy because we are in an era of global war. And diplomacy now has to now be understood as merely feints and vying for time or whatever, because this war that started into 2020 when Russia went in and did that, like Jessica said, World War III has started. For me, that's the start of World War III. We are in and we're years in it, and war is just going to spread. So that's my first thoughts.
Well, I think anything is expected. I mean, everything that's happening should not be of a surprise. But I don't know how to, like, a mixture of surprise and expectation yesterday. It's kind of you're leading your life, and then suddenly you're seeing reports of what's happening over in Iran. And since we did an episode on Iran, I think that as of right now, the only thing I'm just going to say is my first reaction to all this is it reminds me of the time when Syria was hit, and it reminds me of the time that Iraq was hit, and it seems like a perpetual instigation and constant war, and we're just leading into a greater crisis that I'm just afraid for the future. Since we've been covering about all these proxy wars, larger wars, and just the global escalation of a more intense Third World War scene. And so I'm just feeling, my reaction to it was I'm getting nervous and anxious over our future. And I mean, I can see the connections to what's happened here in Mexico, but I think it's very obvious to anyone that's been listening, since it was in operation last weekend, it's in operation this weekend. I agree with you, Andy. Zero negotiations and diplomacy at this stage. And I think for me, seeing how Israeli links and US American links to the cartels will here also give me an insight into, because I've been trying to figure out how much is embedded from what's happening like here, and I'm seeing so many connections that I'm going to hold out and share after we talk about Iran.
So when the Iran thing happened yesterday, I figure we would pivot to that topic to some extent because again we're ready to discuss Mexico, right? I actually was the one who started texting in the group because I did start seeing
I remember.
on the news, right? And then social media and there is something, right? Like I think we'll get into that right at some point. But there is this fixation media coverage of violence, and like, I always have this rule of thumb when like there is synchronized coverage, right? Like there is something else going on, right? When they're telling you to look here, there is more than meets the eye, right? Most people will absorb the main headlines, and so I apply that to Mexico, right? And then I'm also applying this to Iran because we are also prime in expecting this attack, right? Like this is none of us are surprised, right? We are concerned, but I'm pausing for a second because I want to see what's behind the show too, because there is a spectacle, right? That is also being displayed to drive a narrative, right? Not saying that there is no violence happening, right? Not saying that there was no decapitation strike, but I also, with the lesson of Venezuela, right? I'm also wondering, after you said Lipson, right? Like that they were having a meeting above ground. I'm wondering who of the ruling class sacrificed these other pieces for them to stay there and to make an alliance because the world is getting you're making alliances are forming. You better pick your fucking side because I do think there is an escalation, right? Right now we're seeing remote kind of warfare, right? Like drones and missiles, right? And it's almost somewhat surgical. It's not just uh, and so I that's why I'm taking a pause, right? Because I also know we're being sold a story, right?
Mm.
And we get swallowed in that story. So I'm having those questions like who sacrificed what in Iran for what? What alliances are being made? Obviously, there's an energy aspect to it. These things, I agree with you, Lipson, that I get annoyed with a lot of commentators that basically take a moral stance, and like these ruling class people are idiots, right? Like the American ruling class, but they make calculated moves. Like yes, Trump is the face of it, the reckless, leader, blah blah blah. But he's not the one making all the calls. Like he is not, right? There is a strategy behind this, and anyone who thinks that they're smarter than these motherfuckers, I would question for starters, because there's plenty of questions, plenty of information we don't know, plenty of headlines that they sell us, right? And so I am immediately annoyed by anyone who calls the US leadership idiots, or,
Mm.
because they have a calculated risk, right? That they have obviously went into a region that has a potential to disrupt a lot of energy markets, right? So there is something there, and I think as things develop, we might have a better picture. But I'm not buying the entire narrative right now. That's all I'll say. But I do know that we live in a violent system, right? Where that is what really underpins everything. And like, these notions of legality, that's another thing that annoys me. Anyone who wants to get me into a conversation about legality, legal or illegal strikes on Iran, I don't want to hear that shit. Like, this is a waste of time, because the people who rule these worlds understand that brutality is ultimately the ultimate underpinning of power. And so it is in display right now, and that's where I think Mexico comes into place. And I know that there is, like you said, Eduardo, there are links, between all these regions, between all the violence, between the violence in Palestine, and the strategies used by the cartels in Mexico, and not just in Mexico. This has happened, during the School of the Americas, right? And like the torture programs that were run, the weapons that run through Latin America. There is connections there. Again, the entire apparatus of brutality is connected. And so that's why I'm not like opposed to linking these two, because to me, like they're very much part of the same thing that's happening, in the entire world.
I am. I want to get clear though. Is it confirmed already that the Supreme Leader
Yep.
Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is dead?
Mhm.
So it's hard to follow something when like there's so much news going on, and that, like I feel that that's also something that's happened in my readings about Iran, because so much fake news, AI going on. So it's confirmed.
Yeah, and I think I guess one other thing I would ask Kenny is I do think it's important to be specific about what you doubt and what you don't. Otherwise, it's so maybe if you couldn't carry on, could you say the thing you doubt, then you thing you don't? Because maybe you doubt that a bunch of kids were killed, or maybe you doubt that that this. What is your doubt part?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not doubting that there is kids that were, those are the reports, but I know that, for example, will be used by people who use morality, right? Like alone to criticize a systemic thing, right? Like, oh, look, they killed kids, and that's when it starts to matter, right? Never mind that they've been murdering people, and also this is just and like maybe this is where we transition to the cartel thing, right? Like where the violence gets attributed, and the violence that gets covered, it's a particular type of violence, right? Like kids or cartels, right, that are selling drugs, right? Never mind Purdue Pharma, never mind, the alcohol industry, the entire pharmaceutical industry, right? Never mind the hours of work that we're subjected to make fucking living, right? And that's what I'm saying, that that murdering of kids is useful in that sense to maintain the narrative con in control, in that the critique doesn't go beyond that, right? And it gives a limited understanding of what's really happening. No doubt, like that's fucking, I have a little kid and I would fucking lose my shit, if anyone, did anything to my kid. And I think as any parents, right? But that's what I mean, like, right? Like that narrative is being thrown out there. So kids got killed, same in Palestine, right? And I think it just limits the view and understanding of the complexity of the violence that this system produces. And so the things that I'm doubting is like, yes, Iran, did strikes right back, and but again, where are the massive casualties? The same in Iran, right? Like, and that's what I mean. Like, maybe I wonder, right? Like, I don't know for a fact, was there a deal made with the ruling class? Because, like you said,
Right.
like just like in Venezuela,
But
right?
right.
Because there is factions in ruling classes, right? They're not a monolith. There are people like you said, Lipson, that are gonna be a fuck this. I'm gonna run away. I'm gonna protect my ass.
Right.
Fuck these motherfuckers. I'll throw these motherfuckers under the bus. And so that's the things that I'm wondering, right? Like, what kind of factions, are in the because the U.S. cannot afford to invade a country. That is a fact. I think that they cannot right now they cannot afford to invade a country. They have to do shit like this, like they did in Venezuela, like they're doing in Iran, that they're potentially doing in Mexico, that they're doing in other countries in Latin America. And like in this violence, where they go after a head is showing, yes, we'll go get you. So make a fucking deal, or we'll go get you when you're fucking sleeping, when you're having a fucking meeting. So because we're not gonna invade you, we cannot afford that, but we'll go fucking get you and your patsies. In a precise targeted way. So now this makes people think, right? Like the leaders, whether it's the cartel leader, right, in Latin America, because like, I agree with you, Eduardo, they are an institution, right, that doesn't get legitimacy, right? But they are an institution of the capitalist system, and they're intricately connected to the apparatus of like the three-letter apparatus of the United States, for example. The CIA is deeply connected in the drug, in some people claim that they run all of that shit,
Yeah. Yeah.
And so but the weapons, the money, like, can you talk about cartels without talking about where all the fucking money goes? Like, we'll get into all this because I mean these are all rabbit holes, but like it's all connected. It's just that we're sold like bad. This is the line where these people are bad, and this is the line where this is legal, and like full of honor, like versus like the dishonorable people. And
Right.
that's the line that I'm questioning here, and that I'm saying that it doesn't exist from my understanding of the world.
Let me just say, and I do think we need to move to Mexico. And Eduardo, if you have any final thoughts on this, the part of what you're saying I agree with, because I don't know if I fully agree with it, because I'm not sure I fully understand it. But the part that I do agree with, and it is the part I was trying to emphasize, is everything we're watching are actions of various ruling classes. That's all we're getting to see. And for people who have hopes, the hopes in the multipolarity, the hopes in the fight back of the Iranian state or the Chinese state or the Russian state, that if you believe that, if you have hope in any of them, then you have put your hope in Jeffrey Epstein. That's what I mean. Because, like, I agree with this, Kenny. I think it's entirely possible that deals will even struck before the decapitation within the IRGC, the International Revolutionary Guard, in the same way that we got a surprise deal that was struck within Venezuela. And now there may be a pantomime of strikes back and forth. And essentially, the U.S. has already captured the Iranian capitalist class and snatched them from the control of the Chinese or the Russians. If that's the case, gigantic victory for the United States. Doesn't change the fact that this globe is heading towards nuclear war or World War III, but those questions can exist. All I can say is I don't know that, but I do know that you cannot put any trust in any section of the international capitalist class, which is going to be a centerpiece to what I'm going to say about Mexico. Because if you do, you give up on the actual possibility of getting us out of where this is all leading. So you become spectators in something that we need to become participants in. So I'll just say that that's the part I agree with in what you said.
I'm just wondering about strategy here. If we just step back, and I thought China and Russia were very much backing Iran. I thought they were backing Cuba. I thought they were backing Venezuela. That I think what's happening in Mexico for me is more of a state political, financial interest. I don't know if it's so much geopolitical because unfortunately Mexico is the USA's backyard. We are going to be we're going to be an alliance whether we want it or not. We've always been in alliance. I hate to admit that, but that's the truth. We're just the backyard. And so I don't know if there's anything to capture of Mexico because we'll still be there. But there's a difference between Mexico's recent US military operation versus those other three countries I just mentioned. And so from a strategic point, and Ukraine as well, if we bring in Ukraine here, where the fuck is China and Russia? I'm not, as far as I've been wondering about that. Have they not been in alliance with Iran, Cuba, and Venezuela? So what's happening there? Why are they not taking care of their own? China's pretty massive, and so is Russia. But I'm not too sure if Russia has the wherewithal with what's happened in the Ukraine, and China is making back deal negotiations. These are just speculations of mine about saying pretty soon, then you're going to allow me to expand within the Asian the Asian sphere, that area of the East. I'm going to have Taiwan. I'm going to have all these other countries, possibly the Philippines, and etc. And that's fine. So, any idea around that?
Again, the thing that I would say is that the capitalist world is a winner take all, and so from my vantage point, the U.S. is in an offensive, right? Because they know they have to go after, you know, the contenders. So this is not even about Iran, like we said. This is about China, right? And Russia is also kind of a buffer between China and the U.S. And there is an inevitable confrontation. So what the U.S. is doing is taking pieces off the chessboard right now, right? So they're in an attack trying to go for the queen. So they're in an offensive because they know the world economy, the world is not big enough for two big players. And if they don't want to lose, they have to go ahead and be aggressive. And like, remember a time it seemed like they were retreating, but now we know, now we know where they're at. Now we know their play. Now they're like, gloves are off.
Yep.
They're
Sure.
unapologetic,
Yep.
right? They're unapologetic about regime change. And so China is doing their own thing. They have to be getting ready. They know what game they're playing, and at some point they're gonna have their own offensives. But it also shows you the game that they're willing to sacrifice pieces, to play their own game, right? That ultimately, like, these alliances are just as good as they're good as long as they're useful, right? And when you have to retreat to be offensive, that's what you have to do.
Yeah, and when we talk about Mexico, I see what's happening. In my opinion, I see what's happening in Mexico very much in line with the U.S. geopolitical interests, Western Hemisphere control, and using Western Hemisphere control as a means of projecting itself in power. And this Venezuela to Iran thing really shows, like what Kenny said. I was saying, oh, U.S. is on its back foot. It's like, okay, it's got off its back foot. And now it is throwing haymakers and connecting, in my opinion, it is hitting. And I understand your question. Where is China? Where is Russia? And I don't have an answer for that. But remember, in my opinion, all we're saying is, where is Jeffrey Epstein? Like, where is Epstein trying to find justice for the Iranians? Where is the Chinese Epstein? Where's the Russian Epstein trying to find justice for, what's going on in Cuba? And yes, Russia's going to tries to break the thing, but none of these people are heroes. None of these people are heroes. And I think even the left would almost wince if I said the best thing that could happen right now is for the Chinese ruling class to be taken down by its own working class right now. That is the best thing that could happen to this globe. There is nothing that's going to come from any of these ruling classes that we have any interest in, except for this continued violence. And we will be spectators to, because the only thing we can ask for is, where's China helping Iran split an aircraft carrier in two with a hypersonic missile? That's what we'd be asking for. And it's not about 5,000 soldiers sinking to the bottom. It's about saying that the task before us is ours, and it is not a task of observing. It's a task of of acting. And we saw with AJ and the UESF strike that they've even gotten strikes to become theaters, strikes to become things that are literally used by sections of the capitalist class to help another section of the capitalist class. That's not going to work. It has to be something independent. So ultimately, I don't have an answer. Maybe China's got a strategy that says, oh, we think the US is going to keep its hand deeper and deeper in the cookie jar. And they have this, like Brzezinski from the United States saw that when Russia entered into Afghanistan, or Soviet Union entered into Afghanistan, they could use that to trap them. And maybe the Chinese ruling class is playing that kind of game. But the reality is none of these actors are going to get us out of this thing. So I don't have an answer for what they're doing. It looks to me like they are on their back foot in relationship to the tennis match I'm watching. But this tennis match leads to global war and nuclear war. And so we've got to take the rackets out of their hands. We've got to get the players got to get them off the court, and we have to basically take over. And that is not happening at all. We can see that situation is very grim. And I think this gets very much to the situation in Mexico, in my opinion.
Thank you. What did you want to make that segue?
Yeah. Okay. So, and this is where I really hope you can, because again, I saw Mexico from like what Kenny's talking about, the television computer theater from here. What was reported? It was reported like a dramatic, victorious attack by the Mexican state on brutal drug cartels. I can't remember the name. The letters were CJ and G.
The Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJ.
Yeah, and the name of the dude was what's the name?
Nemesio Ceguera Cervantes.
Yeah, right. And so the way it was reported, like this really, like the Mexico had made a dramatic and important, headway on its war on drugs. And then what starts to come out that got my, and I was like, and then I was hearing like it was like a bunch of violence that was taking place in relationship to it as maybe a counter response to that, but ultimately a victory for the Mexican state and for who's the president? Name of the president in Mexico?
Claudia Sheinbaum.
Right. Mm-hmm. But then I start to hear about the CIA connections and like the U.S. and Northcom, the U.S. Military apparatus, which covers North America and South America. Or North America, really, because that's Mexico, part of that, basically giving them the information to go make a hit on this guy. And even the counter response to it is, well, I was looking, forget the counter response for right now. And it looked more to me like very much a collaboration of, again, two venal sections of the ruling class, Mexican ruling class linking up with the U.S. ruling class to strengthen their own position. This helps the United States because it turns Mexico, it expands the ability for Mexico to be used as a launching pad for war on drugs, war on drugs into South America. because of the success of what they've done in Mexico and the fusing of the Mexican state with the U.S. state in terms of their various apparatus of social control, the military and CIA and things like that. And it allows Mexico to strengthen its own control over its own people, particularly in the run up to what looks like to be the Olympics, no, the World Cup that's coming. And what do I hear? I hear reports from the United States about their war on drugs, and in Mexico they're like, wait a second, these drug cartels were able to do this because they got arms from the United States. They were getting like we restrict your access to arms. So the U.S. is helping a war on drugs, and Mexico is fighting its war on arms. And what it allows both to do is to enact massive controls of their own population, to control the border. And it just looks like a giant victory for the U.S. goal of gaining ever more hemispheric control of the southern North America and penetrating into South America, because war on drugs are going to be the raison d'etre for the U.S. cleaning house and getting China the fuck out of South America, and militarizing the whole operation and creating successful collaborations with ruling classes across all of South America. And it's going to be like what we say goes. That's how they're going to use it. And they're going to just try to wipe bricks off the map that way. And they're going to take Brazil out. They're trying to take Iran out. To me, you can start to see how all of this stuff is like, oh, this could be successful. Not successful in stopping world war, but successful in the U.S. forcing its opponents deeper and deeper into a corner.
So I agree that there is a strategic geopolitical role of Mexico to the U.S. For example, like you've mentioned, right, like that the violence, like you're saying people come to Mexico, Mexico's fine, and there is a part of disagreement there of me, because I have connections to those regions where there is cartel operations, right? I work with people, there's some family, and the cartel presence it does exist, right? Like it's a player, right? Like in this region that is actually very economically important to Mexico. That where mining happens, where like your avocados, limes, come up here, your tequila, and so like rare earths, can be produced in this region, and so the cartels don't just dedicate themselves to drugs, right? That they also have controls of certain industries. I mean, there's Canadian mines in these regions of, Jalisco, Guerrero, Michoacan. And so the cartels play an economic role in this region that is important for Mexico. And so events like this, right, like where this is being sold like an increase in violence, right? Because like when the things went down, when this leader Mencho was killed, there were roadblocks, there were buses burned, there was a Costco burnt, right? Like there were things depicting the cartels as unleashing, this cartel in particular, unleashing reckless violence, But like you said, Eduardo, that was not the case. I've asked people with families back there in those regions, and like the violence was not indiscriminate. They were burning some cars and stuff, but they were taking people out of the cars. So there was a display of violence, and it seems like it was for effect. But there was no indiscriminate killing, right? And the other point that I want to make is like these cartels do have a role, and it does affect people's lives. So they don't go around and killing. I've been to these regions. They don't just stop you and kill you. That's a lie. If you're playing the game, you're gonna get caught in the game. And yes, there is people who die every now and then, civilians that are not part of the war, and but they do have also a disciplining character to their presence, right? They're disciplining the workers of the regions to play a role in the economy, and so they are a de facto apparatus of control. And because lives do get affected, that's what I want to say, but I don't want to. that's not the only story here, right? The story that I want to sell is that they're economic actors in a system that is connected to the formal economy, right? The amount of money that they move, like I kind of hinted earlier, they don't just hold it in cash. You know, laundering money takes institutions, banking institutions, you know, to funnel that into not just Mexican economy, the American economy. So U.S. banks are deeply involved in this shit. You know, on top of the Central Intelligence Agency and other agencies, you know, the ATF, all these motherfuckers, and you know, there's more shit that I could say, but I can't. But I know firsthand that there are uh, that this is not just a case of like individuals corrupted, right? Like that you know, a bad CIA person. No, these are institutional strategies where you know, all of these systems are connected. So when you're talking about the cartels, you're talking about, you know, the Mexican ruling class, the Mexican economy, the U.S. banking, U.S. weapons manufacturing, and so you know, but it is useful, right, to highlight, you know, people like Mencho who, you know, depend on people who are, you know, like they don't, to manage these empires, they need highly educated people. They need highly trained people that come from institutions like the Israeli, you know, special forces or the American special forces who come down and train them how to use Israeli and American weapons. You know, Israeli and American technology to surveil, you know, the populations, you know, in those regions.
I I'm not trying to discount what happens to individual folk, regular civilians that find themselves in the crossfire or even are um, um, there are cases of kidnaps, there are cases of robbery, there are cases of extortion, there are cases of small businesses being extorted. I'm not here to deny any of that. That doesn't, that's not my experience, it's not experience of my family. That's I'm simply saying the percentage, it's like what we're talking about COVID, like the percentage of people versus the actual ground violence and war that's happening are between cartels and cartels. They're between US backed cartels, they're between South American backed cartels. These are the wars at large. So for me to focus on the small percentage of people that want to focus on that, the violence happening to their lives, it's to me like forcing me to look at there's something larger happening. So to the people that you know, Kenny, to my friends who want me to focus on the, I don't know what percentage it, but the smallest percentage of the people whose lives are affected directly, I don't want to discount that. I don't want to dismiss that. There's lots to say about that. We can dedicate a whole episode and bring in people and share their lives. I'm sure there's lots to say around that. And I've heard of stories, lots of stories from other folks. I don't want to discount that. That's number one. What I'm concerned, it's like when we talk about COVID and we were talking about, you know, if the flu, to me, what's concerning is the amount of propaganda and, as I said, the news porn that is selling Mexico to distract us from the real thing. Even the BBC sharing false things like the church of Puerto Vallarta being burned. It's not existing. Universities being burned. That never happened. A plane at the airport never happened. The whole city of Puerto Vallarta burning in fumes. It never happened. Zero, like none, no one, no tourist was taken. None. There's not one report of a tourist taken. There's not one report of a civilian. There's only one case I have found online. If anyone else can help me find that the cartels took a civilian, a regular Mexican person, anybody. There's only one reported case, and I was trying to find out who. Like, I don't know if they're connected to. Like, there haven't been anybody. And that's what I'm concerned about, is there's all this show and theater over violence. Yes, but violence against the state, violence against interests. Because, yes, these people were privately trained by Israeli nationals. All the hardware, the military hardware that this cartel has, either from the USA or from Israel. It's military hardware. And the person we talked about, this El Mencho, started his life out selling drugs in SF, in San Francisco, California. Like, as that, I sent it, there's so many in Spanish, but the one in English of that lady I sent in the video in our group message, she was just like, the cartels have ethics. I mean, I'm not trying to romanticize or fetishize. I'm just saying that from my experience, the cartels don't really go after, and I can even show videos of US Americans going into cartel territory and then leading them away from it. Like, go back to the area where it is safe. You know, they don't really mess with civilians in large part. And I think there's so much emphasis on my compatriotas, my Mexican nationals, on focusing on that we're distracted. And I don't have to be here on What's Left to discuss all the atrocities, all the secuestros. We can dedicate a whole episode, but you can just turn on the news if you want and take a look at that. And you can find lots of YouTube videos and dedicate yourself to that. And there'll be plenty of news porn for you if you can just look up Mexico cartels, and then you can feed yourself on that if you want. I think we're a small channel because we don't focus on news porn. And that's what I would like to concentrate on. So to me, it's like I get frustrated because all of this is a distraction from what's really happening. Networks, even from the olden days in the Cold War, so all the way to Central America, feeding US American intelligence. And it's like, is that discussed? Do you know? These drug trafficking networks were operations for the CIA during the Cold War. And the other thing is, it's like exactly what you said, Kenny. It's not just about drugs. There are mafias that control the avocado industry. But why? I know someone directly that she's from Michoacan, and she knows folks that are a part of that avocado industry because it's a supply and demand issue. It's not really because, Mexicans have it in their DNA, or Latinos in general, or Colombians, or Central Americans have in the DNA to be drug traffickers. No, mafias have existed in history. Queen Victoria herself fought with China. And so she's the largest cartel. I said this before, when I was in the UK and we were having, how do you say, fogata? Like a bonfire. I remember there were people, friends of mine, people that I knew at that time that were like, oh, who is the biggest drug lord of our time since you're Mexican? And it's like, Queen Victoria, she was huge, you know? And no one talks about that with, what was it, opium being sourced and being fought over with China. So, I mean, the mafias that also control pisos, the plazas of Italy, and as well in Spain, and the connections. I mean, I just don't, that's what I'd like to focus on, because I don't have, that's why I do some dark humor. It's like, they're not in my neighborhood. I'm looking out my window. People are doing their lives. But that's what irks me. You know, it's like, I don't want to contribute to what's already on YouTube and what's already in the news. So yes, I'm more concerned about that. So I think you answered the question I was going to ask you, Andy, is you said that this is a geopolitical fight. Do you mean to say that China, maybe that the fight against China's infiltration or trying to take over South America and is that what you mean? Or can you just expand on that? Because I feel Mexico you're muted. Because I think Mexico's, as I said, is already a part of Team US,
Yeah.
USA.
But it's being established as a staging ground, both
I see. All right.
materially and politically, using the war on drugs and giving the ruling classes in South America literally an example of, here's how you can strengthen yourself. We can work with you for you to gain control of your population. Scheinbaum is showing you the way. So she's an example of, remember in the defense strategy or the security strategy, they were saying we are gonna say to the Western Hemisphere, it's better to deal with us, not just as a threat, but as we have something to offer. And here is they're handing over the chalice and saying, we're going to give you the keys to the castle of how you can control your population if you work with us. And war on drugs are the way. And I really agree. Like, let's be clear. This entire drugs operation, if you wanted to get to the heart of it, you'd have to pull the CIA out. If you wanted to get to the root of global drugs, it's called illegal drugs, because really the drugs that are the problems are the legal ones anyway. But at the center, at the head of the octopus, is the CIA. It's not anything in Mexico or Colombia or anything like that. But that's what I mean.
Go
And
ahead.
again, like I agree with you, Eduardo. Like this is again a show, right? Like the whole cartel violence, quote unquote. But to me, I also read it as a message, right? An option to Mexico, like because like this, yes, there is connection, right, between the state, Mexican state, the American state, and these cartels, right? And just like I see them just like the Taliban or ISIS, right? Like we can also start a war in your fucking territory. We can provoke a war and destabilize your territory if you don't align with us. So, and these, those have the effect of disciplining people, right? Like, and that's, like of, you know, submitting the Mexican people to the state, essentially, right? Like, or other powers that might be maybe welcoming the U.S., right? Because and so that's kind of the point that I'm saying that the effect of this propaganda is to discipline everyone, like not just the Mexican workers, the American workers too. Because look over there, look over there, like we'll protect you here. So that's what I mean. Like I agree with you, like the cartels don't mess with people indiscriminately. There is, things in like lives are affected in these regions, right? Like it doesn't happen in Mexico City the way that it does there. I've gone to Mexico City, I fucking love it. But I've also gone to Michoacan and I know there is tension, right? Like they're not shooting everybody, but there is tension where people have to change their lives and behave a certain way. So they're more disciplined than the Mexico City, people, right? Like, and so in effect, like that's what I mean. They work as a ruling, power in that region to discipline those workers that are making avocados that come to the U.S., right, and to make sure that that fucking market continues to flow, right, without you demanding better working conditions, right? So that has that effect, and so we all get caught up in this. So I agree with you. It's important to unmask the veil of one separation of the illicit and legal, right? In two, like they're also exaggerating, selling us a bullshit story to make us all scared. That's kind of my point that I'm making.
I mean, you nodded your head around some of the AI images that I mean, stuff like that's being shared is just false. It's
And again,
plainly false.
that's how I knew it was bullshit because BBC, the New York Times, the Washington, Wall Street Journal, everyone was covering the Mexico thing, right? And they don't give a shit most of the time. So then there is a play here, right? Like, and that's usually the signal for me that there is a game to get us all connected to the media apparatus and get us involved in a story that's really not existent, right? Like in like there's even questions as to whether they actually killed this guy, right? Like there's people who have that question, just like the Charlie Kirk thing, right? The fact is that we're sold spectacles weekend to weekend at this point, month to month, right? To get us all disciplined and get aligned in one way or another. And there is violence happening, absolutely. And I do have questions with the, Mexico and like the Iran thing because they use a small amount of violence to like justify disciplining everybody. But I do agree, like ultimately we're heading to a big, massive clash, right? And these are pieces on the chessboard that are getting aligned to make more powerful and violent plays that have to happen because there is no other way to finish this game, you know. And so Mexico does play a role in that, Mexico is actually very central, to the continued functioning of the US in a war with China.
Mhm.
And the other thing I was going to say is this is as we know, this isn't about drugs. This is about removing one head and replacing another, replacing it with someone that is actually going to be more uh, in cooperation with the Mexican government or the U.S. American government. This isn't like suddenly you remove a cartel and you're Breaking Bad when you're trying to eradicate cartels. These cartels are going to continue existing because it falls in line with what is the agenda of a U.S. state to continue having this control over the hemisphere. I'm not going to ever just praise and say, "Oh yes, finally they took down a drug lord." No, it's because I know that this has to do with, as I was discussing with my cousins, these are largely connected to be used as in the future military forces, like what you said in ISIS or the alliances that were happening in the Middle East. What you had is people, but not ISIS particularly was alliance, but actually some factions
Yeah.
were. But that's what this is for. So whether it's a formal military force or an informal military force, it's really just expanding your power and control to be able to use it when the time comes for the war to escalate. That's what this is. So this idea that we're eradicating cartels, it just won't exist. The cartels are extension. And actually, many of the people who are in the cartels were also part of the U.S. force. So I just don't. That's to me the most important thing. It's all this training of criminal groups that are the, if you would follow the money, follow the chain of command, leads back to the greatest power and the greatest mafia and the greatest pandilla gang member, which is the U.S. state. So that's what I think I'm concerned we're losing in the news. And you won't have it. I mean, what do I expect? You won't have the news reporting that. Of course not, because it has to, you have to follow a narrative. So that's my frustration in all of this. And that's why I think I've been making these black humor, sarcastic humor of where are the cartels kind of thing. I know lives are at stake. I'm not stupid about it. And I know that there are states that, but it's like I've traveled up north and south of this country, and I have heard stories, and largely either you have the wars that are people are in the crossfire, people's lives are in turmoil because there are war zones, but those aren't all existing like in every single place. And I think that eventually, if we don't, and it makes more sense to keep the military, a strong military force outside of the US state, just right there on the other side of the border, because that way we'll have our military training ground, everything happening on our backyard, where it's not actually seen by the rest of the people. And we'll continue saying that narrative that, those countries over there, they'll be the ones they're the ones dealing with the drugs, and they're the ones with all this of the violence that exists over there. And that's why we have to remove the criminals. Therefore, we have to expand Palantir. Therefore, we have to expand Pegasus. Therefore, we have to expand more biometrics. Therefore, we have to expand more of the Internet of Things. I was just reading somewhere about how this guy who is an engineer, he was trying to do the Hoover, the vacuum, remember Allison talked about the Internet of Things, how it's connected to the digital system. And he was trying to actually get his vacuum to do like some self-cleaning or something, and he was trying to get connected to the camera, and then suddenly it somehow triggered a bunch of cameras that he had access to, other vacuums out by other people, civilians. I mean, they're all connected. So so we're just, and what about Ring as well? Ring is also connected to surveillance. So I mean, you have to have these narratives, right? Get rid of the immigrants, therefore we have to have these systems connected. Get rid of the violence, therefore we have to go do operations. We're just removing the head of a cartel so that we can continue controlling that cartel. I mean, that's how these things are connected. I know you both know that, but I want to make sure that that is emphasized here on What's Left, and that we're not losing the real story of what's happening. Because that's what I'm afraid of what's happening, is that we're losing that story, and that it's all getting muddled, and it's all getting you know, uh, um, just we're inundated with information about Iran as well. And at some point, as I was trying to read about Iran yesterday, we're just gonna be so fucking crazed about what is real and what's not real to the point we're just gonna not know. We're just not going to know. And there's going to be all this other stuff happening on the other side, and our screens are just going to be telling us another story.
Yeah, I mean, uh, I I do think the only thing you can know, are the
I
things
know. I'm
that are
no,
physically around you. But I don't go so far, and I understand that it's necessary to have people on the ground. Like I would not know from here that what was fake and what was real about those images, but
right.
I believe what you're saying because you
Yeah.
are closer to those regions and you can say that just didn't happen. I'm sorry. Um, but I do think it's important to know things that did happen, like Maduro was taken by in chains into the
Mm.
United States and brought there. I don't think that's AI. I don't.
Yeah.
It could be, but I don't think so.
Right.
Khomeini was killed when his compound was destroyed. Could be a lie. I believe that happened. Scheinbaum is now her hand has been strengthened by working with the U.S. state. Could be a lie. Could be that that's actually an AI projected Scheinbaum. No, but I think that happened, and I think those lessons of if you don't work with the United States, you end up blown up or in chains. If you do work with the United States, we can help you. I think it is important to know, like, or decide what you think is real and not real. And I think those things are real. And I think message received. And I think that the hand of the U.S. state has been strengthened. And I really agree. First of all, like you said, all these just this cartel and almost all these cartels are U.S. are U.S., Israel, or directly trained by the existing state that they're in, whether it be Colombia or Mexico. Most of them have connections to the state, training, institutional connections, so that when they are removed, there's nothing to be celebrated because it's a removal by we're walking down the same thing that you ran into when they got rid of Maduro in Venezuela, and like suddenly everyone's like, "Oh, good." It's like, dude, the people the people who just did this are like, you know who they are? They'll fucking bomb you and kill you whenever, and they'll blow up kids in a school, and they don't care, and they'll bury it under the rubble that they did for Khomeini. Like that's who these people are. Like you've walked them into your place, So but I think your frustration is like people time and time again not seeing where the root of this stuff comes and therefore thinking that their lives have been improved when really what's happened now is the noose is actually getting tighter because I think like you talked about, and it's not just it is directly a digital thing. I mean, you're aware of the what is it called? The Clave Único de Registrado de Población, unique population registry code thing in Mexico, right? This is something that is much more likely now to be instituted to basically make a digital ID system that says you can you can use the internet, and the fact if Mexico is able to do that, it makes it easier for it to be used in the United States. And Mexico is going to, like, in the same way that Israel is a launch pad for all this surveillance bullshit that comes to the United States. Now Mexico is going to be a little mini Israel for the United States. So and I gotta say, hey Brandy, do you have that article you were sharing about Ellison and his nonsense that just happened while we were blowing up Iran? Can you pull just the one paragraph out of that and just come over here?
I love how Lipson is not asking you, Brandon. He's telling you.
Yeah, basically, but I obey my.
Let her find her like paragraph.
Who said patriarchy didn't work?
What did he just?
Who said patriarchy doesn't work?
Yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh, I thought the dogs were, but the dogs.
Focus on the paragraph.
Look at.
God, he's intense.
Man, Brandy.
¿Qué pasa?
Brandy, blink if you need help.
Blink twice.
I know.
Hey, look, they're concerned about you, concerned about you. It's crazy. So Brandy read this to me yesterday when, bombs are flying in Iran. But while this was happening, something else was happening. And I think it's worth reading just as a way of underscoring some of the stuff we're saying.
So just to give the context, this is like Larry Ellison and talking about both him and his son, who is part of the whole CNN merger thing and Paramount and whatever, and the consolidation and AI. And I can send you this article because it's good. Again, there are a lot of parallels between what's unfolding with Iran right now and the early days of Iraq, and one of them is this. The last time the country was consumed by a war in the Middle East, Larry Ellison quietly built a surveillance state in Britain while nobody was paying attention. He poured roughly $270 million into the Tony Blair Institute, whose staff embedded themselves in the National Health System and immigration policy working groups. And what came out the other end wasn't just cloud contracts. It was a mandatory national digital ID scheme that links a citizen's employment history, benefits, healthcare records, and physical movement into a single government accessible identity. A wallet on your phone that the state can read, blah, blah, blah. Oracle holds over £1 billion in UK government contracts, and the infrastructure is already built. Like basically they own all the data there. And then she covered this in a previous article, which there's a link in this. The reason it matters right now is that Larry Ellison is running the same play in the same window in this country. I've been deep in the media side of the Paramount merger, and what that means for journalism, whatever. But there's a whole other dimension that I'd been underweighting, and it came into focus when I was reading an analyst report about the sheer volume of data Oracle stands to absorb when the media deal closes. Once I saw the full picture of what they already hold and what they're about to add, the merger stopped looking like a media story with a cloud footnote and started looking like a data acquisition with a media acquisition attached to it. Here's what happened in the last 17 days. On February 11th, Oracle won a landmark contract from CMS, it's like some government something, to host Medicare, Medicaid, CHIP, and ACA marketplace data for more than 150 million Americans. On the February 12th, the Air Force awarded Oracle an 88 million task order for Cloud One, its classified cloud platform spanning top secret and special access program workloads across the entire Department of Defense. Yesterday, February 27th, Paramount and Warner Brothers Discovery signed their merger agreement, $111 billion, the largest media deal in American history, with Oracle as the cloud infrastructure and the entire combined company will run on. And today, February 28th, Oracle published the blog post authorizing generative AI to process federal data, like the government gave them the approval, to process federal government data at the highest civilian and DoD security levels. So that whole media merger is Ellison's son. And so she's saying that whole thing, plus the health records, for 115 million Americans and top secret military intelligence from the father, like all the same company, same family in 17 days.
And if there's so much stuff to be digested in that, but maybe the simplest way I can say is wars abroad to control capitalist classes and working classes abroad must come with are based on wars instituted at home. And so while they are bombing Khomeini, they are creating the infrastructure at the very same time for even more control internally. That's what has to be understood. And these things are what's happening together.
I'll post it on the
but thank you.
I'll text you guys.
Because Brandy read that to me yesterday, and it just made me think about
it's fucking horrendous.
Yeah, like how all these webs, but all these things are intertwined. Thanks, Brandy.
Yeah, thanks for I uplifted your morning right there. After talking about all the wars and cartels, here's one more craziness.
Right. But that's why I wanted to include that part, because I had brought what's going on in Mexico with KERP, I don't know what the acronym.
Halkur. Yeah.
So,
Um,
That seems to, I'm glad you guys brought the whole technology aspect because honestly, I was kind of like forgetting about it, just looking
mhm.
at the propaganda. But yes, it ultimately involves everyone, right? Not just the people affected in these regions, but the entire world and working class people, right? That have the potential at upsetting the power structure. I mean, like I've spoken about my trips to Mexico, right? And actually, the first place I've ever noticed surveillance technology was in the Guadalajara airport because you get funneled through these tiny, like almost like telephone boxes. Everyone has to go through there as you come into the country in Guadalajara. That's been my experience. And so like Mexico and also being in Mexico City, like in some of the Airbnbs that I stayed, you had to use biometrics to get into the fucking buildings, right?
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, they're doing digital photographs, fingerprints, iris scan. It's happening everywhere. For folks, the expats that were coming during the lockdowns that were trying to in the free state of Mexico, it is non-existent. It's not going to be existent in anywhere in the world at this point.
Mhm.
Electronic signatures, iris scans, all this stuff is happening and being implemented. You know, I want to retract on something I said before, and I'm wondering what I'm exploring. I have in the past I used to be a bit more obsessed over the stories of cartels and how they were running small towns and the 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 philanthropic, altruistic, also the the level of giving that they were doing. Some of the cartels were to some of the towns. I think that the largest cartels at this point are not that independent. So I want to, this is something I've been talking about with my partner, that they are not independent anymore. And as I said, it is an extension of the US military force in order for it to control a state and the rest of the Americas. And as we have now pointed out, and that you've now given me more ideas about this, Andy, to further make sure that when this world does escalate, that there is already a force there to be ready and at hand when necessary. So those aren't independent. Those aren't the cartels that I'm looking forward to controlling countries. And those are definitely the ones I'm more afraid of. When I was speaking about how I've seen independent, and I'm still hesitant to even talk about it,
Yeah.
independent cartels to even, it's, I almost would, again, I don't want to romanticize or fetishize these cartels. There are factions at the lower level that were maybe in the past. Since I'm not a part of it, I'm not infiltrating these that were more independent and that were definitely more adored by people were because they were doing things that the U.S. that the Mexican government was not doing for the townsfolk. And that's what I was speaking to at that in the past. That I thought that there would be more of a interesting mm, fight against the state
Mhm.
at that time when I said that. Knowing what I know now and what I have had to read in this past week about so many connections to Israel, to the military hardware, 80% of arms being used and being funneled through the US border down south, knowing how uh, military operations had to use cartels to have intelligence down in Central America during the Sandinista time, during the Caldera time. The Jeffrey Epstein class, as I'm seeing it, is not just Jeffrey Epstein, but I'm using it as Epstein class, is so intertwined with large, you know, militant groups that I'm not confident that those groups are as well saviors at all.
Yeah.
I just want to state that
I think,
because
go
so
ahead.
connected.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to clear up because I have said something in the past, but I
Mhm.
was speaking to more independent rule
Mhm.
cartels that I thought were interesting to note, to observe, and to see what we can learn from those fighting against a state. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
It
Am I
totally makes
clear?
sense.
All
Yeah,
right.
it totally
Any?
makes sense. And I know what you're referring to. And
Yeah,
when you
because
said it,
I said something in the past in a separate episode. That's why.
when you said it, I agreed with it more than I would agree with it now. Particularly in light of our episode we had about NGOs and nonprofits. And I would say more likely the cartels are closer to better to be understood as armed NGOs than
Mm.
something that's independent and sop up independent energy more than they and help develop it. Do I believe there are still possibly local independent groups operating that are not NGOs? Yes. Do I believe there could be cartel-like organizations that are operating more independent and are not institutionally controlled? Yes. And though the part of them that is independent is the part I support and has a revolutionary kernel in it. But where it will lead, we don't know.
Yeah, this is a complicated subject for me, and I think for it doesn't hurt my pride as much. It hurts my my understanding of the way the world works, and I feel that not so concerned about the tourist industry being hurt. I'm concerned that since this past week, I've been talking and having ongoing discussions with family members and with my partner that more and more I become more central on or focused on how the world works. And it's given me so much insight to look into this further. And so I appreciate having this conversation. And I don't know if I have any hope. Sometimes it gives me because I think where do I look at? Do I look at the communities that are trying to thrive? And yesterday, as I conclude, I wanted to share this. I was at the street market. There's a place called here, close to where I live, about maybe 40 minutes, and it's called Atenco. It's a small town. And when Vicente Fox in 2001, 2002, the ex-president at that time, who has been hailed because he was putting a middle finger to Trump. I mean, I don't really care. But at that time, he was trying to create a new airport and take it was also an excuse to take the territories, the lands of peasants. And I'm so moved by these people because they had machetes and they got organized. And I met people at the street market yesterday, and they were telling me stories about the solidarity that they had at the time. And they put up pipes, and they were the entrances of this pueblo, of this town. They got ready to set up pipes on fire, like this is the kind of stuff that I think that should be happening. And if the military force was going to enter, they were going to blow it up. They were just going to blow it up at the entrance, and this is their land that they were going to take care of. And I want to know more about this story. And so I just moved by that kind of solidarity and the action that was taken to protect their land. And eventually the president gave up and the military did not enter.
Mm.
And these are people that people would deem stupid. They're not educated, that are not, they're, they have a low rate of they're just low income folk. And here they were as organized and in solidarity. And one of the women who she's the older woman, she said to me, you look like an educated person, and I think you got a lot of schooling, and you and I feel so intimidated by it. And I said to her, I'm not sure if that matters. I think what you went through and what you did matters more. And I'm so moved by your experience. And I think that we're losing that. And I hope that one day we continue having that strength. So it doesn't matter what I've studied or what I know. I think your experience speaks more to what our past can show us. And so she's so humble. I was so moved. And so I just think that that's the people that I continue being I'm continue to be moved and touched by. And so, yeah. So maybe that's my hope.
I think that's a good story.
Just like highlight what you're saying, like that there are stories of resilience, right? Of people who overcome odds, or the machinery comes on top on them, but living free, or or fighting for their freedom or self-determination is stronger than, and there is a cost, but there is a point where that's all you have left, and you have to fight back. And so thank you for sharing that. And I think that like, even if we don't have hope, like, we have no other choice but to fight and keep pushing, and we'll see where our battles will be found, and but ultimately those come to taking action, right? Not just theorizing or talking about it, and actually doing things. Because fucking posting on social media is not gonna change shit.
Well, and I also think, and I didn't know it, but as Kenny was talking, I thought about, you mentioned her humility and being so humble and not even recognizing what all that she had been part of. I think a real revolutionary movement is going to be more like that than like Mamdani or Frank Lara. Real revolutionaries are not going to be sitting there promoting themselves and pushing. They will be more like what she's being like. I just believe that, and that's why it's going to be a little harder to recognize, because it's not going to come with all that bluster and bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing she told me was, my partner, she said, because we've had discussions about revolution, and he said, I'm not sure if I'm ready to go fight. And I didn't know how to answer that, but she answered it, and she said, you don't have to be everyone has to be on the front lines, whether you're a medic, whether you're a cook, whether you're an organizer, whether you are using a machete, whether you are on horseback, everyone has to be doing something. And people always run to the idea that you have to be there with a gun. And yeah, that might be true. Everyone has to be. Might be having to happen. But there's so many parts and moving parts to this that you have to really think about. Anyhow, let's conclude. Thank you so much. I will show clips, but maybe another time we'll do an episode completely devoted to that. I think I was kind of just sharing my lack of hope. Then she came along. Here we go.
All right, just real quick, because of that story, and again, bringing back technology, right? She didn't bring up crazy technology, right, to do what they did. And yeah,
machetes, horseback riding, coordination, solidarity, networking, mutual aid. That's all that she was talking about. When they blocked food, they had to network. When they were closing up the entrance of the town, when they were locking up people, it was just, yeah. So well, that does it for this week's episode. So What's Left is a weekly political podcast / channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes wherever you found this episode, or on our blog at whatsleftpodcast.com. You can find past episodes to this podcast / channel there and connect with us. I remind folks, if you like anything you've heard here, or if you have anything you want to say, you can always subscribe, write to us, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our platforms on the Spotify, iTunes, Podcast, BitChute, Odyssey, YouTube, Rumble, or Telegram. You can find our blog and any of those links in the episode notes wherever you found this episode. And if you would like to, like I said, give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us to cover, contact us through our blog. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-hosts Kenny Cepeda and Andy Libson. Thank you all. Check us out next time. Ciao, ciao.
Bye-bye.
I've been on time recently.
You have been on time recently. You were on a pretty good run there for a while. And now because you have been our other co-hosts seem to have become a little lax. Now you and I are waiting for them.
It's time to start, what's it called? Doing notices. Written
Yeah,
notice.
we've got to start instituting like late passes and submitting. Like maybe we could do we could say if you're every minute you're late, we reduce your word count on any say. Maybe I can get the AI companion to kind of keep track of the number of words people are saying. That way I can tell them when they have to be cut off.
Yep. You need to micromanage.
Yeah, that seems like a good use of AI, and that way it really is fair then. It's like it's not about enforcement, it's about fairness.
Had you been thinking about it a lot, Andy?
Oh yeah, and I've been trying to figure out if we can set something up that'll do an iris scan to make sure that we can tell who you are.
Hello, everyone.
We'll put Brandy on there. Brandy, open your eyes so the thing can tell whether is it Brandy? Okay, yeah, it looks like it's Brandy.